John, do you want us to get started?
Yeah, why don't we get started? Welcome, everybody. This is Storytelling the Black Experience. We're really looking forward to this event. This is the second in a series of webinars that we're doing, monthly webinars that we're doing. And this one is in conjunction with our partners at NABJ. Before we begin, I just wanted to remind those of you who have friends or children who are students, or if there are any students on that, a Chicago Foundation provides scholarships to deserving high school and college students. And we have applications within the next couple of months. There's applications for our college and graduate scholarships. The deadline is February 18th. And then the deadline for our high school and national scholarships are in March. The high school scholarships are March 18th. So you definitely want to take advantage of this, or have any friends of yours who are students take advantage of this. So go to our website at chicagomeonline.org for more information and to apply for these scholarships. So I'd love to see a lot of activity there. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to my NADIS colleague, Afia Owusu, who will introduce the panelists and our colleagues at NABJ. Go ahead, Afia.
Thank you, John. So as John mentioned, my name is Afia Owusu. I'm the executive producer of local programming for Wild Gold Broadcast. I'm also on the board of governors for NADIS and a member of NABJ and its Chicago chapter. On behalf of Erica Maldonado and the entire membership workshop community, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us for our January workshop. This year, we thought it was crucial to continue the conversations and growth opportunities that began in 2020. We've partnered with our local NABJ chapter to kind of further that conversation. Brandon Pope, I'd like to just give you a moment to talk a little bit about NABJ before I introduce our moderator.
Absolutely, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Having forums like this and safe spaces for Black journalists to express what they go through is a central part of what we do here at NABJ locally and nationally, but also our missions are mentorship, advocacy, and just overall trying to increase diversity in newsrooms. That's what we're all about. But we're also about inspiring the next generation of journalists. And one way that we do that is through scholarships every year. This year, we're giving out more than $10,000 in scholarships to deserving students. And those applications start February 18th. Mark your calendars for that Friday, February 18th. The biggest scholarship award we're giving out, I believe, is $5,000. The Ethel Payne Scholarship in honor of a legendary Chicago Defender journalist. So Friday, February 18th is when that scholarship application deadline opens, and then it closes Friday, April 29th. So mark your calendars for that. Thank you to all the panelists who have joined us for this really important conversation. Thank you to NADIS, and thank you, Afia, and thank you, John, for your partnership and what I hope is the first of many going forward. And we're just happy to be a part of it, especially to be the first event we do of the year. It's quite an honor. So thank you so much, and let's have some fun.
Great, thank you, Brandon. So moderating today's panel discussion is Marshall Harris. He's the sports director at WBBM-TV, Channel 2, CBS here in Chicago. He previously worked at Sacramento, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Huntsville, and Columbia, Missouri. Marshall has also covered everything from the Summer Olympics to the World Series, and he went to Mississippi State University. So without further ado, Marshall, I turn things over to you to introduce our panel.
Yeah, Brandon, John, thanks so much for having me moderate this panel. Excited to talk about storytelling, the Black experience. That's what we're here to do. And we got an all-star panel here to talk about it. Let's go through the panelists. You could just raise your hand when I call on you. We'll start with Miss Polnesha Barnes. She is a special products producer at WLS here in Chicago. Prior to Chicago, Polnesha was the 6 p.m. producer at KDVR-TV in Dallas, formerly co-lead of the Black Employee Network and an Emmy Award winner. Prior to joining KXAS, Polnesha worked as a producer at WREG-TV in Memphis and in Pensacola, Florida. She is a graduate of the University of Mississippi, but we won't hold that against her, at least not today. Also joining us, Taylor Musgrove of the same company, WLS, here in Chicago. She joined ABC7 Chicago as an associate producer in their programming department. Last year in November, Prior to the current role, she was a multimedia journalist at the Next Star station WHO 13 in Des Moines, Iowa. She is a Chicagoland native, got her start in the industry by interning at TMZ, WGN's Morning Show, and ABC7's Windy City Live. She's covered a lot of things in her time, the Iowa caucus, the 2020 presidential election, civil unrest that occurred after the death of one George Floyd. She's most excited and passionate about highlighting positive change makers and conversations in the community she serves, which is very much apt to the conversation we'll be having today. Also, Taurean Small joins us. He's a reporter for Spectrum, Washington, D.C. He's a Chicago native as well, a Northern Illinois University graduate. Congratulations on that turnaround in football this year. Taurean started his political reporting career in 2015 as a multimedia journalist for ABC 57 News in South Bend, Indiana. He reported on governmental affairs and education for 3 years before covering Indiana's U.S. Senate race during the 2018 midterms. Today, he is a Washington correspondent with the Spectrum News DC Bureau team. So go ahead, Taurean. I like that. And finally, Joshua Short joins us. He is an anchor at KDVR in Denver. He's a broadcast journalist from Chicago, Illinois, not too far away from where he grew up in the Windy Cities, where he grew up professionally anchoring and reporting in South Bend, Indiana, for the better part of 4 years. His passion for storytelling, breaking news, shown through tenacious work ethic, both on and off the clock. He's been nominated for several awards, including 2 Emmys, winning one in 2021 for his reporting on gun violence in Indiana. His work also receiving recognition from his fellow peers at SPJ, otherwise known as the Society of Professional Journalists in the state of Indiana. When he's not working, very active in his community. An example of that would be this panel, Storytelling the Black Experience. Let's get this thing underway, guys. When we talk about storytelling the Black experience, I just wanted to kind of go over that concept for people who may not be familiar with what we're focusing on here, because storytelling is really what we all do working in this business. But there are different experiences that people have through that. And as a person who's worked in many places, growing up in Alabama, going to school in Mississippi, working in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the West Coast and Sacramento, you see different communities experiencing things differently wherever you live. And the Black community a lot of times gets marginalized in the way those stories are told. A lot of that is lack of diversity, lack of representation in management, different newsrooms, whether it be print or broadcast journalism. I just want to kind of get your guys' thoughts on your experiences. If you just share a little bit about how you've kind of come to know storytelling through, I guess, a Black lens. And I'll start with the last person I mentioned, Joshua, just living in Denver. I know that's a situation in and of itself where maybe diversity isn't at its strongest.
Yeah, but you know what? That's not an excuse. I think that, and you mentioned that, it's always important to find those little peaks of us in every market that I've been in, including South Bend, and Taurean and Brandon knows this as well. You don't see many of us, but there are so many stories about us that are still necessary to be told. And finding those is a challenge. That's the challenge that's presented to us. But I think that's one thing as a journalist that helped me grow is how to find and seek those stories. And even here in Denver, the same exists. We talk about gun violence all the time here, just like we did in South Bend, just like we do in Chicago. And we see who are the ones who are sometimes the part of that, whether it's a victim or a suspect. We see that it's very similar to what's happening in Indiana, what's happening in Chicago as well. But yet when I walk down the street, I don't see many of us. So does that mean that our stories still don't matter? They do. And I think that's the challenge that's presented to all journalists in all of these markets where there are not many of us, is to find and seek those stories. And I think sometimes managers find that difficult to understand that, okay, well, our demo says one thing, but in reality, there are still problems and issues that exist that we as journalists should be able to highlight. And I think that's a challenge. It is difficult to do as a journalist. I'm not saying it's easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I'm learning that here, especially in Denver. You see some of these stories out of nowhere. We have, for example, a hiking group that next month is going to be going to one of the summits out here. And we're doing that for Black History Month. But you don't hear about that often. We have to talk to people. We have to hear this from sources. Does that mean that because there are 8 people doing this, that there are not anybody out there who looks like us who would find this story interesting or compelling? I think that's a challenge in every single market, but that's our job. And I think part of the job is to overcome that challenge of telling stories, even when it seems like there aren't any that exist there.
Certainly, that's the case a lot of places, what you described. I'll go next to you, Polnesha, because you got that management cap on. And I'm just curious as to how those discussions change when, you're not just someone working in the newsroom as a producer as you have in the past, but now as a manager, you have a stronger voice than most when having just these discussions and how to approach things, what to cover and how to cover.
I'm not muted, right? Okay. I'm actually going to take it from a personal perspective because the evolution of my career went from, I'm going to be, the person that stands on the mountaintop and I scream out for the people who look like me and I'm a representative for everyone. And while that is still the case, now I have decided that I cannot speak for everyone that looks like me because of the level of intersectionality that we all have. Like you said, you were raised in Alabama. I was raised in Mississippi. I don't know the Black experience from a Midwest perspective. But what I can do is encourage people to bring everything that they are to the conversation. So I take it from that lens. I say, you know what, let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation first. I'm going to put Taylor on blast right now. We were in my office the other day and talking about what we were going to do for Black History Month in February. And we just simply talked about, being young Black women and what that perspective looks like. And it came up, we were like, this is uncomfortable. We're going to have to sit in a room with people who don't look like us and pitch stories that aren't part of their reality. What does that look like? So it comes down to empowerment. It comes down to honestly doing the hard thing. And a lot of people don't think it's hard. And I don't know if I speak for everyone else, but sometimes you get nervous because you're like, oh God, they're going to shut me down. They don't care about this story. We've talked about gun violence over and over again, but at some point we need to talk about Black joy. We need to talk about Black accomplishments. We need to talk about Black, just honestly, just the joys of being a Black person. I mean, it's awesome. It also comes down with its downfalls as well. So I try to encourage the conversation about how we started, the middle point, the process, and then how we get to an authentic story about the Black experience. I've been able to tell some really, really cool stories since I've been here in Chicago that don't involve shooting and and pain. And I think it's really important to take the pieces that you are and bring those to the table and encourage other people to bring who they are to the table so that we can tell a holistic view of what the Black experience looks like. Hopefully I answered your question.
Well, yeah, and
I've been known to ramble.
It's okay because you're leading me perfectly into Taylor, because I'm just curious as to your perspective in that conversation you were having in Polnesha, especially with your experience as an MMJ in Iowa, which, like I said, again, diversity maybe not what it's necessarily known for in Des Moines.
I think for me, it was listening to the community and not always your newsroom, if that makes sense. So being a MMJ in a town I wasn't from, Des Moines, a lot of times I was going off of what my coworkers did, the stories that, we routinely reported on. And it wasn't until I really started connecting with people in the community that I heard different perspectives that they wanted highlighted that they weren't seeing. It was multiple times where I would talk to somebody and they were like, I don't watch your station because of X, Y, and Z. And I had to bring that back, to the people I worked with. Like, these are the things that we need to be highlighting, and not only story-wise, but also the people that we give a microphone to. Because I remember doing a story that impacted the Latino community, and I found this new nonprofit I went to go talk to, and one of the ladies told me, she was like, I am tired of you all putting the same two people on screen to talk to us. And that was a different story that my station had never explored before. Like, why do we keep going to the same people who give us the same talking points, who are easy to talk to for us because they'll say what we think we need them to say? And so that was something else that I had to explore in Black and Brown storytelling, as far as go to the community for what they really want to see, and what's important to them, because we are local news, and then also highlighting different voices in the community that can bring different perspectives.
And Taurean, you have a unique perspective here because you've worked locally as a journalist, but now as a correspondent on a national level. I'm really curious as to when you are pitching stories, when you're getting, because you just have like a vast ocean of what you can do being in DC. How do you approach this, and how does it affect your ability to not only I guess pitch stories, but also how you go about telling your stories?
Yeah, I think I was just privileged to fall into two really good jobs that presented opportunities that were ripe for storytelling, surrounded or circled around Black voices. And like Josh mentioned, in South Bend, in Indiana, you would imagine the population is so small that it wouldn't necessarily be as important to tell their stories. But being a reporter who covered government and education, I covered a school district, the St. Joseph County School District, that was almost equally Black as it was brown as it was white. And so that presented the opportunity for me to tell stories about how they address discipline. There were quite a few reports that came out about the disparity in how Black students were treated versus white students. So I looked into restorative justice, that practice when it was starting in an alternative school in the district, and how it spread across the school district, and now it's implemented in each school. I covered then Mayor Pete, but now Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg's first and second term as mayor. And one of the things I was most interested in was diversity and inclusion in the ranks. So I did a series on that, but I dived even deeper. I wanted to look at beyond just who are you hiring to be the face of your administration, how many opportunities are you providing to Black businesses? So I looked at their purchasing, and they provided a purchasing report not too long after that. And when he was running for mayor, it was an honor to see a lot of my reporting as what they were citing to, criticize or look into his record. On a macro level, covering national politics presents the opportunity to tell some of those same stories, but in a bigger pond. So one of my beats that I cover on the Hill congressionally is Wisconsin's delegation. And for the 2020 election, I wanted to really take a magnifying lens to how the state, but specifically Black voters in the state, reacted to the 2016 presidential election, and whether or not Democrats would have the momentum to flip that state back, because it was once known as this bright blue state. Now it's more purple because Trump was the first Republican in a long time to win the state there. And I looked into it, and as I was looking, I saw about 19% of Black Wisconsinites decided to sit out the 2026 or 2016 election. And my original thought was, well, why are they withholding their vote? Let me make the angle with, Black people are disenchanted by the Democratic Party or starting to. And the first interview I did was with this local organizer. She runs the group called Black Leaders Organizing Community, so Block, BLLC. And I asked something to the effect of, why are Black people sitting out the election? Why aren't our people participating? And she bluntly told me, well, why is that the question? Why haven't Democrats come and engaged our communities? Why aren't our issues being talked about? And 92,000 voters in Wisconsin broadly did not participate in the 2016 election. Why should we take the blame for this? And why not white, college educated voters who also sat out? And I was like, listen, you called me out. You're absolutely right. I think it's important that we tell that story. So that was a huge part of me shifting the way that the narrative went for my story. So yeah, again, I have the great opportunity of doing that as the only Black reporter in my newsroom. And I always give a shout out to her. She jumped ship for CNN this past year, but Eva McKinn was exactly like me with that mindset. She part of her beat was Kentucky's congressional delegation, and she made sure to cover the story of Black hemp farmers in the state. A small population, but a very delicate and complicated history with, one, the drug, but also farming. Like, what's it like for a Black farmer to be on a plantation to farm essentially marijuana? So it was, I find her fascinating in the work that she's done, and she inspires me to keep doing the same thing, even though she's in a different shop now.
Well, certainly we see that stories as they come up. It's a lot of it is what angle are you going to take? And that's a great story by, the person you're interviewing, flipping it on you and saying, well, but why is that the thing? And I think that's a lot of times we can all at some point or another get in kind of a rhythm where we have a blind spot to, like, are we really looking at this from every angle we need to be looking at this? And I really want to kind of get into the nitty gritty with you guys, because we kind of understand what it is when we talk about Black storytelling, but the how is what I want to get into, because I know there's people who are us and people who will watch this in the future and we're like, okay, but how do you do what you guys are talking about? We'll go all the way back to you, Josh. How do journalists prioritize the positive news stories of Black people in the media? I mean, I think that's the overwhelming. Polnesha brought it up, Taylor was talking about it, but like, how do we get that to the forefront where it's so much easier, especially because every newsroom is now short-staffed, for the assignment editor to just say, hey, we got a shooting over here and a shooting over there, and we got bad things are happening. If it leads, it bleeds. You know the story.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of managers go into it saying, okay, why should I care? And a lot of these managers don't look like us. And so now you've got to do the persuasion game, and you got to do it with confidence, as opposed to just pitching a story that's both compelling and riveting for a group of people and for people who don't look like us at home watching TV. That's the challenge, is you have to try to convince the unconvinced as to why you've got to tell a story that you think is good. I was actually talking to my producer about this last night, who's watching this. I think she's one of the participants. I remember pitching the story, and it was about gun violence, but the predicate of it had to do with what's happening now. How do we solve this? We always talk about it, but how do we get to the bottom of it? What's the foundation of it? And the best way to go about it was through the people who did it. It's kind of like, hey, they did it, they learned from it, and now they're doing better in their communities. That was a part of the story too that I wanted to tell us. Hey, they did this, they were on one side of society, but they made the change, they made the flip, they made that 180. And I thought it would be an uplifting story, an inspirational story, and one that will add context to this very complex, convoluted situation of gun violence. And absolutely, we talk about the bad so much. We talk about the pain, the grief so much in our community. But I think sometimes that's how you're able to reach people who don't look like us, because we all feel something, everyone. And so going through the story of, okay, here's gun violence in Michiana. This is what it looks like. This was in South Bend at the time. These are the numbers. These are the stats. We've talked to families every single week. We talk to victims' spouses every single week. We talk to city leaders every single week. What else can we do? It's kind of like we wringed out the rag too much on this. Now, what else is next? And I remember pitching. I said, hey, let's talk to convicted shooters who did it and are now doing better for their communities. And there are people in this chat that can attest to this. I was told no. I was told, I don't know. We'll put it to the side. We'll have you do this instead. And okay, I was so staunchly for this story that I decided to work on my own to find those people, which I found 3 people who shot and killed someone, and the reasons are different. We can get into that later, but I asked them why. Why did they do it? And when they told me off the record why they did it, 3 different reasons stood out. Had to do with, they felt like that's how they protected themselves. That's all they knew. It was a combination of jealousy and survival. And it was, again, all they knew. That was important to me, because a lot of people who are in different communities don't know that. They just see gang violence, they see gun violence, and that's it. So I went back to pitch this story and gave them the reasons. And this was the how for me. I said, you may not have lived this, but I have. And there are a lot of people in our community who are living this, and they don't necessarily always look like me either. So why not do this story? Why not uplift people around our entire market while also giving context to this situation through people who've done it? Because this has not been done before. I got a little bit of a pushback, but still was able to do the story because I was able to put into context the why something was happening. Sometimes that's what storytelling involves. It doesn't involve just pitching a story. You have to persuade. And that's the part of the job that I hate, because sometimes you feel like your story matters. You feel like telling the truth about your people matters, giving context to situations that nobody gives context to. We talk about shootings all the time, but we don't like to give context. But when you pitch it that way, when you tell people why this is important, or you tell them we've never done it this way before, people, they seem to listen differently.
I think that's a great point about, like I said, I think in this business in general, people are just stuck in their ways. They've been taught how to do a skill, how to report, how to produce, how to whatever. And once they get set in their ways and they think, these people hired me to do it, so they think I know what I'm doing, so I'm gonna do it the way I know how to do it, and that's the only way it needs to be done. And
I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just going to say just one quick thing. That was part of the argument. My assignment editor said the way to do this is to do a jailhouse interview, and we've not done that in 11 years. So good luck. That was what I was told, and it wasn't as blunt as that, but those were the words that were said to me. And I said, okay, we don't have to go to a jailhouse. It's a pandemic. I don't want to go to no jailhouse. So we did it over the phone. We made it work. I didn't take no for an answer, and I think that's important in reaching the house.
Taylor, I'm really curious as to your experience and similar things of just how do you prioritize those stories? How have you done that in your current and your former jobs?
Well, I can say for my current job, it's really easy because I'm lucky enough to be on a team who welcomes those different type of stories, which I'm so blessed for. So now I really don't have a problem doing it. I was saying in Iowa, it was also a different scenario because I was a morning reporter. So I enterprised a lot of my stories. So it kind of was, the ball in a lot of times was in my hands to kind of do what I wanted. There were times that I received backlash or a no for a story that I thought was really important. I don't know if this is the best advice, but I remember Anchor telling me, you have to think of it as if we're all operating a basketball game, you are the ace, you're the point guard. So we give you the ball, but at the end of the day, you take the shot if you want, you pass it if you want. And in that conversation, she was basically telling me, if you have a story that you really want to do it. You know what I mean? Make it happen. So she was like, if it's a no initially, go talk to some more people, go get some more resources. You're MMJ, go shoot it yourself, then bring it where they can't really say no. Because at the end of we all know too, working in local news, some days we don't have it. We don't. We need something to make slot. We need something to make air. And you can say, well, I've been working on this story. So that was a way that I think could help a lot of MMJ's reporters in telling stories that, they feel like will get rejected or have been rejected, is really being like, okay, let me take matters into my own hands and do it where they can't say no to this. Because I think a lot of times it's easy to say no to an idea versus actually having material.
How often were you told no?
I think I was told no more so after George Floyd's murder, because I think around the time of George Floyd's murder, diversity was in the front for everybody. Let's tell this story, let's tell this story. And then afterwards, I think a lot of newsrooms in Iowa got fatigued and was like, well, these stories kind of don't matter anymore. Like, we're over this. And I had to really, that is when I found the most pushback, where I had to be like, no, this still matters.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people will agree that the fatigue was real for a lot of people who had feelings when they saw that video. And then those feelings, either the more they saw the video and it kind of desensitized them to it, or the longer they went post seeing the video, the feelings weren't there anymore. Or
just the culture of news, as far as we're day of, we keep it moving. So if it's like, if that's not the top thing anymore, okay, what's the next story? What's the next story? Instead of, I don't know, and I don't know if you all feel like this too, as a Black journalist, you sit with these stories for a long time. They mean something to you. And so it's like, how do you get that balance of working in a newsroom that's always on the move forward whilst keeping these really important stories in people's faces?
Well, that's a great question. And we're going to try to have Taurean answer that, because he's got that DC experience for us. How do you do it? Like on the front end and I guess on the back end, as Taylor was just saying.
I guess I've just been lucky enough to work like in my South Bend job I had a Black news director, a Black woman news director, who understood the importance of these stories and would even pitch to me stories about the Black experience to cover. I remember when Black Panther, the movie, was launching, we did 3 blocks of storytelling for me, 3 different packages, and 2 of and I was live all 3 times for a primetime show. 2 of the shots, or 2 of my live shots, I was wearing a dashiki. So she was all about, yeah. Was I extra? Yes. Was it necessary? No. Am I going to do it? Yes. So, yeah. And I think being in DC around a racial reckoning, it also inspired a lot of confidence in my newsroom and my bureau and the higher ups to want to explore those stories more, because it was the trend, to put it bluntly, but also because they recognize the errors in their ways of previously approaching these stories. Like we had internally talked about how in our stations, a part of our company nationwide, don't really try to focus on crime too much, but they reevaluated how they report information given to them by police, whether or not they sift through it more critically now. And we also have these workshops in each of our stations, kind of like boards on diversity and inclusion, that we address how we approach our storytelling through that lens too. But I think now, especially now, that racial reckoning that we saw over the summer, a couple of summers ago, really changed the dynamic for newsrooms. And I think I'm in a place of privilege where I never really had to worry about that, but other people can benefit from that. There was a great piece by Patrice Peck, I think, in New York Times, right around the time of George Floyd, I believe. And the headline was "Black journalists are exhausted." They're exhausted of trying to fight for these stories. They're exhausted of having to cover these stories. And now they're exhausted by it's being in front of them and presented to them by their newsroom leaders to go tell these stories. So it's an interesting place to be in. I think we're hopefully changing for the good, where more people will allow us to have the freedom and flexibility to say and report how we want.
I think what you said about the story about Black journalists being exhausted, that was true then. It's probably still true now, because the exhaustion, there's been no let up. I'll just share with you guys, I was in Sacramento at the time of George Floyd, and I think I was so thankful California was on serious lockdown. And I was just so thankful that I was at home, working from home. I just didn't have to interact with people I didn't want to interact with. And it was a blessing. And because I probably would have popped off on certain people saying certain things. And that's just the way it is. Polnesha, I want to address one of the questions we were sent. And if you have questions, you can chime in on the Q&A. There's a Q&A section. You can drop your questions in if you're listening. But Polnesha, Mazani Ball asks, how do you navigate this unconscious bias in a way that is proactive, because the bias will not go away?
Ooh, baby.
Good question, right?
I think I can speak for a lot of Black journalists when, we all have a unique experience. My name is Polnesha. That comes with its own set of bias. Really quick, before I answer that question, I do want to touch on fatigue really quickly. When people are like, oh, I think our viewers are tired of this, and my response is usually something to the effect of, well, how do you think we feel?
That's fair. That's fair.
From birth until now, this has been our reality. Can we talk about it? Like, you're tired after a year. This is 30 plus years of this living, honey. Like, can we talk about it? To piggyback off what you're saying right now, my message to a lot of my friends, colleagues, whatever, they were like, what can I do? And I was like, before you ask, what can you do? Let me just help you understand. This is not a moment thing.
This is not a sign up for a week, sign up for a month, sign up for a year.
This is not a let me go.
If you really want to
volunteer
do
it away.
something, you're going to be doing it for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And I really had to
Yes.
hammer that home.
Yes.
You didn't send your Cash App to them?
Cash at me if you know it's, let me know it's real.
You know what, Taurean, that might have been more effective.
Yeah.
That might have been more effective. That might have been more effective. It may have been more restorative. What that may have been.
And just to tie a bow on that, I am usually not super just like transparent about this, but I'm going through my own self-reckoning. But I was off of work for 3 months when I lived in Dallas when George Floyd happened. My EP got I had a great managerial staff when I was in Dallas. I had nothing but wonderful things to say about them. But we are a day of type situation, and we got to turn the news out. We got to tell the stories. Well, when George Floyd died, obviously we have to go through this raw video, right? Like we have to go through and edit it and make sure that we're not showing moment of death. You have to make sure that we're not hearing anything that the FCC will come down on us for. And I was tasked with watching that video, which meant I had to watch it over and over and over again, and then watch it on my newscast, and then tell another story about it the next day, and then the next hour, and then the next minute. I broke down. I didn't know what was wrong because struggle is just natural for me. I Black journalists, we have to deal with that. That's just our life. And living in Mississippi came with its own challenges. So I remember I was sitting on my couch and I got sick. Like I was just like nauseous and I had a temperature and I was like, what is going on? Turns out it was a panic attack. I was like, what the heck? What is this? Everything that I had been seeing, everything that I had lived through just kind of came to a head. And I remember calling my boss and I was like, hey, I'm going to be out today. And she was like, oh, you okay? I broke down. I mean, when I say I was very emotional, I cried. And she was like, you know what? We're going to support you. What do you need right now? And I was like, I'm going out on leave because I can't do this anymore. This is too much. I cannot tell these stories anymore. I have 2 little Black brothers. I have a Black nephew, and I am tired of seeing Black men die. I am tired of seeing Black women die. So I took care of myself. So if there's any message there, take care of you first. Your job will be there and it'll get done. I promise. It can't get done if you're dead or, in a situation where you can't produce any content at all. Anyway, I said that to say, moving on to the question that you initially asked me.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate, and I think we all appreciate you sharing that personal experience.
Bias. When I am in meetings, I have gotten a little bit more forward with my words, and in this position particularly, I haven't been as engaged because we've had some huge projects that I've had to head up that aren't necessarily day of news. But in past experiences, I have very bluntly been like, why? Simply asking someone, well, how did you get there? Or walk me through that moment for you. It challenges them. You're not accusing them. You're not coming off as combative. For example, I'll say missing people, and I won't even talk about the whole Gabby Petito and Jelani Day. That's a whole nother conversation. But this conversation came up when I was in Dallas. There was a young girl who was missing. She was Black and 14. And someone said, oh, she's a runaway. We're not putting that on the news. I was under the impression that we weren't in the business of assumptions. What's going on here? And I remember asking a manager, well, why do you think that? How do you answer that? Because there's unconscious bias that is feeding into the fact that you think that this child is a runaway. And the whole table was like, and I just sat there. Just like this. And no one, I did. I leaned in and just waited. Well, it's been our experience. And I was like, but 2 weeks ago, there was a 12-year-old little white boy that went missing and we put him on here. Was he a runaway? And there was no answer. And I think it's moments like that that challenge people's unconscious bias. And that's how I did it. I don't suggest everyone do it. But I think that's a really important way, is just to ask why. We're journalists, it's literally our jobs. Ask why someone got to the conclusion that they're at.
Hey, Marshall, I don't know if I can interject here. You made so many points, Polnesha. I think that implicit bias is something that is malignant in all of our newsrooms. It is not developed, it is not new. It has festered for so long, for generations. And that is something that I've learned about a station that I love, a city that I love, South Bend. Y'all know this. Some of you here, like that was a place that I adore, but there were some real issues, some real problems in these legacy newsrooms where you have people who think they know things that they don't, or they say things and they don't realize how loaded those statements can be or are. And I think that's what's important as a journalist, is to call it out, even when it's exhausting to do so, because it is, and it can be painful in so many ways, and it can be distracting from your job itself. It is important to call it out. And that is something that I had to come to reckon with over the last couple of years, my last 2 years in South Bend, is because of all the racial reckoning that we saw, that summer of unrest that we all experienced, white, black, brown, and everything else in between. We all had to think about things differently. And that's me included, being a Black man for all my life. I had to adjust. And you talk about implicit bias, things like, and I could be wrong with this could be personal, but I want somebody to tell me if they've ever been told by someone, be humble. What does that mean? When you hear those terms, be humble, why do you say that to me and not those who don't look like me? You say, oh man, he's who he is. This is his personality. This is how he's built. He's an ornery guy. He's so full of life. Oh, that's great personality to be like him. But when you're that person, it's be humble. What does that mean? Tell me.
I've gotten that calm down before.
Yeah. Calm down or chill. What does that mean? Things like that. I was also in a meeting. So you know how we all have consultants in the business and they say, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that.
I don't listen to consultants. I'm firmly against consultants.
Oh,
not just because I'm a sports guy, but just in general.
I'm about to say, yeah, that's sports day too. But yeah, no, Marshall, and I'm telling all you guys this, it was really hard. My manager at the time, and this is no secret, I've talked about it openly, and I think she would as well, because we've learned from this experience. But my manager just got hired at the time, and about maybe 3 months in, I had wore a black blazer and a pink shirt and a Burberry tie. I was fly. Y'all hear me? Okay, I was fly, and it was a promo shoot, and it was, I think it was for our morning show, and I wore that shirt one more time after that shoot, and I was calling to my news director's office, and she told me, hey, do you still have that shirt? And I said, yeah. She said, don't wear that. I said, okay. And listen, I get it. As a talent, you get told what and what not to wear. I understand that. And then she kept going with it, and we were laughing about it because we were talking about how bright it was and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And then she said, yeah, the consultant doesn't like that. It makes you look like a pimp. And I remember hearing that. And exactly. And in that moment, I sat there and I heard those words, and I wasn't sure what I heard. So I said, it makes me look like what? This is exactly how it was. She said, makes you look like a pimp, and laughed as a joke. Now, granted, this is a news director who's not racist. I don't think has a racist bone in her body. I'm not going to apply that to her. But she said that not knowing how loaded that was and how hurtful that was. I don't journal. I went home and I was taking notes. I'm journaling everything, and I'm writing stuff down. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I go back to work and I talked to my EP at the time. And he made the same face y'all did. And I said, I think I need to go to HR about this, which I did. I went to HR. And that conversation was had with my GM at the time. And then it was related to her, the complaint, and then me and her, we had a meeting. And in that meeting, we talked about so much. She was very remorseful about her comments. But one of the things that was mentioned in the conversation was that you know, our society is different now. And I have to understand that our society is changing because this generation is different. And I said, yeah, but not just the generation, the message too. This shouldn't have been said last generation either. This shouldn't have been said the generation before that. Those are the things that you have to confront. It was tough for me to confront that because I don't complain. I'm not the type to like to be in arguments. I don't like to be the one that's like, I want to be, you know, the level of attrition is here with me. I don't want to be that guy. But I had to in that moment because I knew what that meant. And I think we all learned from it. But those are the things you hear. The last thing I'll mention here is that my co-anchor and I had a discussion. It's on Facebook Live. It's somewhere still on that Facebook page. Feel free to find it. It was a Memorial Day. And I come into work and I'm making several calls to different law enforcement agencies around the counties. And I'm calling all these places saying, okay, just to check, I wanted to see how, you know, how it was. Was it a safe Labor Day, Memorial Day weekend? How many shootings were there? How many calls to this were there? And all this other stuff. And I had all these stats. And some of them were pretty alarming. There were double digits for St. Joseph County. There was a couple for Benton Harbor. I went by some of the major cities in our area and then the counties. And got to work, told my producer what I did. He said, we'll put it in the show. And that was one of our leads. And after it aired in the 5 o'clock hour, she says, what was those stories at the beginning? My co-anchor asked, who doesn't look like me. And my producer responded, Josh worked on some numbers this morning. She's like, why? Nobody at home cares about the number of shootings on Labor Day, Memorial Day. We're trying to enjoy Memorial Day. We're remembering, and it's fireworks and celebrations. Nobody cares about that. And there was a heated discussion that lasted 2 minutes and 15 seconds because that's how long the break was. And we had that discussion on Facebook Live. Like, this is not your reality. This is mine. This is so many other people's reality who may not look like me. But to say that it's not a story, for you to assume that, there's a bias that you need to approach and address real fast. Because it's thoughts like that our managers also have in newsrooms, that unless it's confronted, it will continue to go by the wayside. And that's important in all of our storytelling, regardless of the market you're in, and regardless of what your demo says the story should be.
Taurean, Taylor, if you have anything to add, now would be the time. I got a list of
Preaching
questions.
going on today.
Ooh, this triggering. I hope what I'm about to say like makes sense how I lay this out. But one thing I will say that was tough for me in these last 2 years, because these were my first 2 real years in my first role as a journalist. And as a novice, you don't feel like you have a voice a lot of times in the newsroom to speak up. And that is what I struggled with. A lot of times getting that voice to say something. And I remember the first time I did get the courage to say something, it was because we were talking about how we were covering things that were happening in Iowa after George Floyd's murder. And one of our senior anchors said, I think we need to talk to more people in the community, more people of color who are educated. And I remember thinking that was very offensive to the activists who were on the forefronts, because a lot of them were young people. And not only were they young, but they were in college or in grad school. And I knew this. And everybody in the conversation was like, yeah. And I remember being the only one like, that isn't right. And so, you know, we were on Zoom. I took myself off mute and was like, well, to be honest, a lot of these people are in college, are in grad school, or have graduated. And honestly, they're the ones who are at the forefront of the movement, as far as they're the ones who are orchestrating these events and doing things. And I remember, and I said, so to say that they're uneducated is unfair. And I remember she like took herself off mute and was like, that is not what I said. That is not what I was saying. And I didn't say anything else, but then everybody who talked after me agreed with her and was like, I agree with so-and-so. I do agree with so-and-so. We need to talk to more people. We need to talk to different people. And I remember after that, I felt like people in my newsroom were treating me differently. And it was so hard, you know what I mean, for the senior people at your job not to accept you. At least for me, it was being new. And so the one thing I would say is like grappling with the fact that even when you call people on their bias, you will not be liked, and you got to be okay with that. You got to rock out with that. And so that was something that I had to swallow, and that I learned when talking about implicit bias in the workplace. And then, but then it was a different situation that you also have to know that it's not that they don't want to be called out on it. They just simply don't know, and they're ignorant. Because I remember it was a different situation where we were doing a special about policing, and this one anchor did a whole piece about police training. And so she was like, I went to this place, you know, I really saw like how they get trained and how stressful it is to be a police officer and like what you have to do. And just having to respond so quickly when things are happening in real time. And again, everybody in the room was like blown away. Like, I didn't even think about it like that. Like, oh, we're so excited about this story. And then I was the only one again in the room to say, did you ask them when you were there about what part race plays in police training? And everybody was like, oh my gosh, like we didn't even think about that. And then that anchor changed her whole piece around before it aired. And that was a part where I was so happy that I said something, because my voice did matter in that way. So it is so hard, especially for new journalists who are listening to this, to get the courage to say something. But I will say you walk away feeling so much better about yourself and what you offer to the newsroom when you do. Because even though that first situation didn't go as best, and you know, it did have a little bit of backlash, now in hindsight, I would have felt terrible thinking if I hadn't. Right now I would be regretting it. Like, I wish I would have said something in that moment. Also, along with saying something, my godmother always tells me you get more with sugar than you do with ish. So a lot of times too is how you say it, because I think a lot of, especially when we're talking about our white counterparts, they don't want to feel racist.
They want to be comfortable above all else. Their
yes.
comfort is above all.
And I'm not saying we should coddle them. That's not what I want to say either. But I definitely do know that sometimes it's received differently on how you approach a conversation. So it's just something to think about. And then the last point I'll make, and this kind of goes back to what Polnesha was saying about having a panic attack. I remember I had to cover a Trump rally. And at this point, I was exhausted emotionally from everything that was going on. And I'm laughing now, it wasn't funny then. But I went to this Trump rally, and these people were nice to me. Like, I did not want to go, but I got assigned it. I went. They were so pleasant. Everyone I talked to, everyone I had to interview, so pleasant. And I was at MMJ, so I was doing everything myself. And I remember recording, and I just started crying, and I could not control it. I was at the Trump rally crying. Luckily, I had like a mask and glasses on, so nobody saw me. But I just broke down, and I did not understand it. I was like, what is going on with me? And it goes back to that point about being a Black journalist and how these situations impact you differently. But then it also made me look at my own bias and just how that can play out. And I don't know if that helps the conversation, but I think my time in Iowa, being somebody around people who did not think like me a lot of times, made me check my own bias. And I think that's healthy as a journalist. Like, you got to learn, you're not always there to teach, but you're also there to learn too. And even though we're Black journalists, and it's important for us to put those stories in the forefront, we kind of got to look at how we tell stories too.
I think that's all great. Your grandmother, I'm with her because my grandmother always told me get more with honey than vinegar.
Your grandma from the South?
Yeah, from the South. Yeah. What, I don't know if you ever had just raw vinegar, but yeah, honey's a little sweeter.
That's good.
Taurean, I wanted to address you. Now, if you have something to add to this, you let me know, but I had a specific question for you. This one comes into the chat from Lawrence. It says, in 2022, Republican candidates for Congress are united in blocking federal legislation and protecting the right to vote for people of color. How do you suggest your station approach this, and individual candidates who are running in your area? Do you call them on their racism? I'll start with you because you are the political correspondent here, but everyone else can address it on the individual local market level.
Yeah, this is, I think the most simple solution to this is telling these stories through a character. And I made sure it's easy to stay with, getting these exclusive interviews with lawmakers, politicians, or whatever. It's an easy thing to follow on. But so many people gloss over that. When I was covering Build Back Better and some of the initiatives in there, I made sure to talk to this disabled Black single mother of two in DC who's doesn't have a steady income, and the child tax credit part of the Build Back Better Act, it was included in the COVID relief bill, but the Build Back Better would have enhanced it, expanded it. It was crucial for her. Like, it was her livelihood. It was her daughter's livelihood. And I think the exact same thing applies to voting rights. We've seen so many stories about, state level changes to election laws that would impact voting times. And we know part of the pillar of the Black community is the church. So taking away Sunday voting or block voting, where it's like after Wednesday night Bible study, you can't go to bus your people to a poll, directly impacts people in our community. So my advice, and this is the advice that I'm taking as well as I start to cover these stories more, find these characters, find that church leader, find that person who has poor access to public transportation, no car, and could greatly benefit from these type of busing or charter situations that could help them, and present these stories to these lawmakers. Like, say I did this when talking about the child tax credit story. I said, I interviewed this woman, no fault of her own. She can't provide a work requirement for the child tax credit. What do you say to her? Bring those voices to these politicians directly, confront them with their voices, and I think you could solve that problem.
What do you guys have to add to what Taurean was saying?
I mean, that was so insightful, Taurean. I don't think we can top that, man. That was great.
I was going to say, I completely agree with that. It's all about finding that character to your piece.
And the second part of that question was calling people on their racism. How do you, is that a direct thing? Is that you just show through the story? And I'm a big believer that you let the story kind of set it up where the person can draw that conclusion. Or does there need to be a more direct approach with these lawmakers who are supporting the bill?
I guess it depends on your level of comfort. For me, especially in South Bend, because I was at that intersection of government and political coverage, there were some characters that I talked to. And I remember this one guy running for Senate. He said something to the effect of he wanted to make English the official language of the United States. And I stopped for a second and I was like, but what does that mean? Like, this is a melting pot. Exactly. There are so many cultures here. What are we saying here? He didn't win, surprisingly, but that's every now and then I get those weird aha moments where I was covering this one guy. He made a comment about he was anti-critical race theory,
critical race
restorative.
theory.
Yeah, exactly. Restorative. I don't think I can find it, but anti-restorative justice in schools. And I said, well, this report, this nonpartisan report, examined your school districts and saw that there was a disciplinary disparity there. How do you explain that? And he was like, well, sometimes some groups are more violent or more, disrespectful than others. I was like, what? Let's roll that back. Are you saying, because I don't want to misquote you, are you saying that Black students are more violent or disruptive? And where's your proof on that? So he had to walk it back and try to smooth it out. But yeah, sometimes just allowing them to speak for themselves and then giving them a chance to recognize what they just said could also help remedy those situations. Because I think that interview in that moment, it was probably like a minute from his first answer to my follow-up to him realizing he messed up. That was like a minute long, and I kept the entirety of that without cuts in my piece. So I think that could be just as effective as well.
Okay, well, I have more questions, many more questions.
Yes.
This one comes from Shinieri. She wants to know, how does one report on another, the ADOS experience without being intrusive? American descendants of slaves, of course, ADOS. How can storytelling the Black experience help non-Black people understand the Black experience? I'm gonna let y'all have it. This is a very difficult question.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you.
Whoever wants to take a stab at beginning to explore this.
Yeah, for me, I personalize it because as some of my colleagues and friends know, I'm a lively personality. And I really love people in general. So I've built relationships many times with some of my colleagues, and it has helped me when they're going on their rants or asking their questions because they feel safe. And then I'm like, got them. So let's walk that back here. So when I was in college, like I'll give them a very personal experience. For one experience was I went to the University of Mississippi Marshall, keep it down. While it was a great experience, I also experienced quite a bit of racism. I was punched in the face by a white man when McCain and Obama were debating on our campus. I've been called the N-word more times than I can count on my hands and my toes. And a lot of times my colleagues will look at me like, what? Also, touch back on microaggressions. You called the N-word? Can't be. No, that is my reality. I am a Black woman. And when you hear me pitch these stories, it is from a lens of experience. And when you shut them down, you are essentially shutting me down. And honey, when that starts getting into emotions, and they're like, well, I would never do that to you. You are though. You are. So taking it from, and that takes a lot of, introspection and a lot of self-awareness to be comfortable to tell someone a personal story. But it has been my experience that personal stories impact people who don't understand you better because they think they know you. And then you hit them with it,
I think a lot of people, they think just because you work together, they may know you, whether it's your peers, your supervisors, whatever, but you are only showing them what you need to show them to get the job done and clock in, clock out, get your paycheck, go home.
Maintain your sanity.
Maintain your sanity, your own mental health. We code switch because we have to. We do what has to be done to get to the bottom line of what we're trying to accomplish. It's interesting in you telling your story, Polnesha, because I know how Oxford is, because Oxford. There's so many experiences that people don't know about until you tell them, and it will literally jar them, and they'll be like, I can't believe, because they are ignorant and naive as to the realities for people who are not like them. And I think it's tough, but to answer the question, how can storytelling the Black experience help non-Black people understand the Black experience? I think there's value in that. And that's whether we're telling the story on camera or whether we're telling the story person to person. Anything that, working under the guise, the assumed guise of white supremacy, you have to understand that, what you share with people may be the first time they're even understanding that this happens because of the way people grow up, and they just assume that either A, this is the way it's supposed to be, and you must have done something to be treated like that, or they don't even fully recognize your humanity as equals, so that they can't comprehend it. So yeah, every little story you tell, if you have the mental fortitude to go through with that process, because let's be honest, if you tell someone something, they're aghast, it's just annoying and irritating. So that's a personal decision we each have to make.
And fragility still exists too. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think it's two different ways that you can do it that I've seen. So I remember when we were doing things at my station around the Black community, I advocated for white people to take part in it in our newsroom, because I think a lot of times when they don't, it's easy for them to ignore it. Like, oh, they're doing that special project over there, versus when they're actually in it, they kind of do have to learn more about the Black experience in that way. And then when viewers see that, I think that has a big impact as well. So I think bringing your white counterparts in the newsroom along sometimes with some of those stories, even though I know some of those stories we want to hold close to the vest because, like, for us, by us, but some things I do think if you let them in, naturally they'll learn, and then what they put out in the world to the viewers, and especially the viewers who love them, can be different. And then the other part of that too is sometimes, like you said, Marshall, like letting them in on those conversations we have as Black people. On a smaller note, I remember I really wanted to have conversations around Black hair at my station, which had never been done at my station before. And I thought it would really be cool if the Black women at my station, we sat down and did a roundtable about the Black hair movement in the news and how we've seen more women and reporters, anchors go on air with natural hair. And so we had that conversation. And in that conversation, we talked about how people shouldn't touch our hair, how hard it is to go to work with a new hairstyle, knowing how your coworkers are going to look at you or the things that they might ask you.
Your
and we taped it
so fast.
Yes. And so we had that conversation and we made it a digital piece. And I remember one of my coworkers came to me and was like, I learned so much from that conversation. She was like, I never even, like those are things I didn't even think about. And our conversations changed after that. So I think sometimes just telling them in a certain way, or just letting them in on those conversations that we have, they can learn a lot.
Early is the head that wears the crown, in my opinion. That's how I get down. That's why I don't have a crown, because I don't have any hair. Just going through these questions, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about, and this is a big one. This comes from Donna, who asks, what's the best approach? This is a universal question. This doesn't even have to necessarily apply to our business specifically. This is just a question of being in the world. What's the best approach when a top executive enables unconscious bias and refuses to get it under control? What is the best approach? I'll let y'all sit on that for a second. And I'll say this. Whenever I work at a company, I've been at CBS for 3 years now, 2.5 years in Sacramento, a half a year here. So CBS Viacom. And, we have to do these trainings like every year, like all these trainings, so many trainings. And I always come out of those trainings thinking, when bad things happen at work, ignorance is not an excuse, because we have these training. I mean, the trainings are real. Like you understand all these. Yeah, the bias, you understand all that stuff if you did the trainings, and you're required by the company to do the trainings. So I never feel bad, one, calling someone out in real time, but two, going to human resources, as Josh talked about earlier, and just saying, hey, this is what happened. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to address this? And I think a lot of people are scared, though. I think a lot of people, they're in their first job, their second job, they're just trying to make it. They don't want it, the fear of being blackballed. And so when you know that your executive is on board with whatever the proverbial bull is that's happening to you, it creates a situation. Because if you go to HR, and then HR talks to the GM, and the GM talks to the ND, and if the GM has the ND's back and the ND's not understanding and can't see what they did was wrong, you're going to have a whole can of worms to now have to address on your day-to-day life, your daily assignments, the way people treat you who are above you. Now, for me, my last job was my first time ever being in management. I was the sports director we didn't have sports for 10 years at the station in Sacramento. Wow. And they brought me in to rebuild the sports department. And we had myself, 2 MMJs. But I did notice immediately, just because of that title, sports director, and the fact that nothing preceded me, nothing existed, I was almost given like this default respect of the title before the person, before they even knew who I was, like the assignment desk manager, the chief photog, executive producers. The way that they talked to me was different than any way I'd been talked to in my career previous, being just like a sports guy, a sports anchor, a sports reporter, whatever. And that's why the more and more I think about it, the more I'm like, did I make the right decision coming out of college? My college roommate, his name's Ben Hart. He is the general manager of a station in Georgia. He went the off-air route, successful news director at different stops, and now he's a GM. And without people like that, people who look like us in those power positions, that unconscious bias in the upper management, because remember, these are people who probably be doing the job for 20, 30, 40 years. They grew up in the old ways of the newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the way it was. And that's kind of the fallback. So unless you're with the times, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place when you pick your battles. And my advice on that is, I'm just careful when I pick my battles. We deal with microaggressions every single day, but like figuring out what you want to do with them, that's the choice we all individually have to make. But I want to hear your thoughts on dealing with a supervisor, a top executive who enables the unconscious bias in that middle management level, whether it's an EP, a news director, whatever.
I would say I was lucky. Great TV during the time of the riots and the summer of unrest, and that point of I guess reckoning for so many people. Great television came out with this edict, basically saying, "Hey, we understand what you're going through. If you have any people of color in your newsroom, do listen to them, but also allow them to have space." So whether that means they don't want to be involved in a meeting, or they don't want to do a story, or they had to take time for themselves. Be empathetic to that because of what we're going through. So great television did do that. I will say though, I guess there's still a great example with social media. There was a meeting that took place. I like to say a meeting took place, and the partiality of my tweets and posts were brought into question. And it's kind of like you said, it's Marshall. It was like, pick your battles, and this is a battle I wanted to pick. So I chose it. I said, what is it about my tweets that you all find interesting or intriguing enough to call a meeting? And one of the things was that I was putting on Facebook a lot about BLM and using hashtags on Twitter about BLM. And I remember the conversation was, we don't want to do that because we don't want to show the appearance of being biased. And I said, what's biased about saying that there's a Black man who was shot and killed and nobody's been charged, hashtag BLM? What's biased about me saying there are so many things people do not understand about Black Lives Matter that should be put at the fore through our storytelling, hashtag BLM? These are the things I was asking. It was like, well, BLM, and I wrote it down here because I forgot exactly what it was until I went back and saw some notes. It can be looked at as partisan or political. And my response was, well, this is neither partisan nor political, it's personal. And it is something that I think so many people find personal. There's nothing partisan about this. People have made it partisan because they don't understand the meaning of it. Just like they've made all these other things partisan. We were talking about it earlier. Different themes, and yeah, COVID, partisan. Yesterday I did a story about January 6th, and now I know about the constituency here in Colorado, specifically Denver. Now I know. I see some of the emails now, so I'm learning as the days go by. But it's interesting because you can easily cower to that, right? You can say, "Well, you're right. I will capitulate and not tweet." But then there are sometimes you have to ask that question: why? How? You mentioned that earlier, Polnesha. It's like, what is it about this that's that? And that's how you can sometimes address these things as well, because there are biases there. And we had a discussion, and then Gray, just so happened, 4 days later came out with Black Lives Matter is something that could be used. Black Lives Matter is nothing political or partisan about it, that they considered, I believe, a human rights movement. And so we were able to tweet about it, and I did not delete those tweets. So sometimes the conversation is worth having, and sometimes the questions are worth asking as well, to see if that brings you to a means to an end, because sometimes people don't know because of that implicit bias. One other thing I want to mention too, being in a position of, I don't want to say of power, but when you are an
No,
anchor,
it is.
You know, yeah, we have a lot of influence in what we do. And especially when you're at the desk and you're seen often, or you're in a managerial position, you're looked at differently. And so one of the things I think my newsroom had an opportunity to learn, and one of the producers who's watching this can attest to it as well, because she's a Black woman, and she's one of very few Black people in that newsroom right now. And as a Black anchor, it was something that market, with the exception of B. Pope and Taurean Small, who people still call me Joshua Small because of you, Taurean, thank you so much. They saw something that they were not used to. They saw a Black man at the anchor desk. And to get the messages from both whites and Blacks and everything else in between of people who appreciated that was something I didn't expect. And I would always forward it to my managers to say, thank you, because I get to sit here. You all didn't have to make that decision. I get to see, but do you see the value in this? So I would always say to my news director, whenever I leave, put somebody in this chair that looks like me, because it is going to be only beneficial to our station, to our brand, and to the community that we serve. And I leave, and as I'm leaving, to show you the implicit bias that takes place, I knew who was getting hired before they made it official. There was, and I don't mind saying this, there was an edict not to tell me who was being hired to replace me. That person was a white woman. Not saying she has not earned it, not saying she does not have the qualifications for that position, but they knew what it looked like, the optics of it, after I made it plain Jane that I will even help in making the recruitment easier for someone to sit in that chair. Now, granted, a lot of people did not apply who were people of color, but to use that as an excuse not to search for and seek out people, they seek out people all the time for these other positions. But for this position, they thought it'd be easier to bring someone into the chair who had history at the station before as a reporter and who is familiar with the area. And now they have two white women at that desk, and they realize it's a problem having two white women who are blonde. So they asked the person coming in to replace me to change her hair color. I guess that's diversity in our newsrooms today.
I'll say this for anybody watching, for all of us who are here, y'all know what it is. As is, hire the quote unquote best person for the job. It is a subjective business. It is a highly subjective business. So much so that many times jobs are more of a casting call than anything else. If you get a certain number of people who can do the job, it does become about aesthetics, background, all of that. So nothing you just said, Josh, surprises me in the least. Taurean, I wanted to get your input on that specific question though, about how you would advise handling something like that when the top executive enables unconscious bias, because I feel like you got that national view. I like that. I like the bird's eye.
I mean, I was going to say, I'm not about to comment on a white woman taking my job because I'm not about to get canceled in 2022. But no, I think it is something tricky to navigate. And as great as it is to have this type of forum where we could all talk and have the safe space to talk about these things and actions to take. I think the sad reality and the sobering reality of the situation for a lot of people just getting into the industry or even working in the industry as a reporter, producer, whatever, they'll see a lot of those situations and it won't be a comfortable place to confront it. And the vast majority of people don't. And that's just the reality of it. And sometimes you have to tough it through and pick your battles, fight through those battles, but know that you probably aren't going to win those battles. And that's just the sad reality of the industry, because there are way more markets than there are you know, people who run these markets that are, you know, filled with integrity and who can address their bias, point it out, call it out, and do something about it. So unfortunately, that's the game you have to play in, and you got to hope that you can finally jump to a place where you could feel comfortable. Again, I've been, you know, privileged to be in two shops that have been understanding and empathetic and have worked. The both situations have worked out for me, but I recognize for a lot of people listening to this conversation now, they do not have that opportunity, and it's just something you have to tough through. I always say ask for forgiveness instead of permission. So when you see yourself, you know, under management that does not understand your plight, the plight of your communities, and aren't as interested in you telling these stories, go out and shoot those stories anyway. And then on a day where, you know, all of your stories fell through, wink, wink, I do, though, have this story that I've been sitting on, and we need to fill a hole in this newscast, so I'm gonna run it.
We used to call those trapdoor stories in all states.
Exactly.
Love
We go
that.
trap
I love
them.
that.
Always have some down there in the basement for the trapdoor, you know?
For this moment. But yeah, it's, I mean, it is a sobering reality, though. Again, just to circle back, not all of us will have this opportunity to be able to defend ourselves or stand up for these underserved, undervalued communities. And that's just the reality of the industry. It can sometimes be toxic, it could be exhausting, but, you know, work your way through, find ways around it.
This question just in out of our question and answer box. Again, you can submit a question if you're listening to the Q&A box. It's a wide open question. How does everyone deal with objectivity, especially on social media? Now, Josh, you touched on this earlier. I'll just tell you guys, like, I work in sports where, you know, we get wild out here in these Twitter streets. Instagram, it's like, if you're not producing foolishness and laughs, what are you really doing? Because that's what sports is for. But I will say this, politics has become polis sport in many ways. I recognize this back maybe in 12 when you had election coverage, and the election coverage resembled more like college game day than it did anything prior to that, where you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people on one desk commentating going into and out of elections. And, you know, with that comes people on Twitter, Facebook. So you're dodging minds, whether it be misinformation, disinformation, and you don't want to be a part of that. So how do you choose what you tweet, whether it's something you're passionate about, whether it's strictly for work? I mean, you know, my number one rule of Twitter is never tweet, which obviously if you're doing what we do, you can't avoid that. Number 2 rule of Twitter is never be the main character on Twitter. You never want to see your name trending. So you follow those 2 rules, you'll be okay. But I'm just curious as to how you guys who are active on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, however you get down, how you guys treat that. First of all, who here is active, would say is active on a daily basis on social media? I'm not surprised, Josh.
Not me.
I'll ask Polnesha and Taylor, do you guys engage?
No.
No,
Why not
I
just protect my peace?
it's a bit different now that I'm behind the scenes. Like, I don't have to, but when I did, the site that I felt the safest with was Facebook. As far as running my professional page. And the best advice I got was that a lot of time you even get more engagement as a journalist when you let the audience in on like personal stuff, like, of course, not too personal, but like focus on yourself, like my morning routine and stuff like that. So honestly, like, that's how I approach social media. And then when it did come to reporting on political issues or anything like that, just sticking to like numbers and like just very fact-based information, right? Data, instead of going too far off of that. Because I realized once you do that, that's when it gets tricky. So that's how I did it. Really quick though, I wanted to piggyback off of what Taurean was saying about sometimes how you don't win every battle in your newsroom. I feel like a lot of times in this, we're all in this because we love it. So it's really hard when we come up on times when we don't like the job. And so it's like really important to realize you can love what you do and not like your job. And just, and like, that's just, that like is what it is. And I remember somebody told me like, you are here for real work, like REEL. And that is what has to keep you going on those days where you don't win every battle. It's hard to deal with the people in your newsroom. So just like remembering that, like, I love what I do. I don't always have to love where I'm doing it, and I'm here for my real work. And so like, keep that in mind.
Wow, that real work line. I'm about to remember that. That's that real talk. I appreciate that. Taurean, would you say you're active on social media?
Not as much as Josh, but you know, every now and then.
Josh, are you a
now
Twitter warrior? Like, what is this?
Listen, I will drag Josh. I haven't seen him in a while, so of course I'm gonna do that.
I've heard
You ain't seeing me posting no pictures of me in a pink shirt either, but no, I what's interesting, because I cover politics, everything is viewed through the lens of, you know, how polarized voters are. So I could just post a story link to something on CRT. I didn't even add a comment to it, and you know, I get attacked on there. Honestly, at this point, I try to not shy away from telling crucial parts of stories that may be viewed as biased or whatever, be it like political or like racial, when I tweet or when I post to social media. But I tend to attach it to a voice. So like, I remember January 6th, when that happened, there were a bunch of lawmakers who said, you know, had this group been largely Black, the response from police would have been different. And it was important to tweet that out because it was a poignant message. It resonated with so many people, and it was potentially true. I mean, based on what we saw from, you know, coverage of unrest over the summer, be it like race relations and stuff like that, it was true. Or a lot of people believe that it was true. And I got backlash, not from, you know, internally, but from people on Twitter on that. And then I do like basically weekly, I contribute to this conservative radio station in Wisconsin to talk to them about Wisconsin politics. And I just brought up that point. I was like, listen, a lot of lawmakers are saying, had this been a Black group or a brown group, there would have been a significantly different police response. And the host at the time was like, oh, let's not, you know, further divide the nation and bring that up, and let's not, you know, add more fuel to the flames. And I'm like, but are we being ignorant? So like, I'm like, but this is the reality for so many people. You know, this is what they believe, and we can't dismiss their feelings because it makes you uncomfortable in the moment. We don't learn from situations like this if we refuse to talk about it. So let's talk about it, and we talked about it.
Josh, I'm gonna get your thoughts on social media now. You hinted before when you talked about having to deal with people calling you into a room talking about it. Has your approach changed either since then or just in general since you started tweeting, Facebooking, Instagramming, TikToking?
It's a great question. Great question. No, honestly, it has. It has given me an objective lens that even as a personal, not just as a journalist, but as a person who uses social media, to be careful what you tweet, because it could have this bias to it. We have our own biases too, right? And we have to, you know, approach those and come to grips with those as well, and to adjust if need be. And the last 2 or 3 years, I think I've realized the importance of social media, the detriment of it as well, and how you can use it to lift others up. I think that somebody told me that Twitter is a place where you follow people that you admire, and Facebook is a place where you argue with people you don't even know. And I was like, that's accurate, because that's what I used to do. That's what I used to do a lot. But now I look at all mediums, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I use it, obviously. I have stuff that I upload from stories almost on a nightly basis. But I also realize that there are things that other people tweet, these ideas, like Taurean mentioned, that is like, oh man, I never thought of that. And it's coming from a perspective that is credible, and it's coming from a source that is also established. And when you retweet those things, they may come with a little bit of a slant, whether it be left, right, or even down the middle, but it's coming from a source that's trusted. And when you share that, it helps dampen the I don't want to say those sources that are not necessarily credible, but that's my job, is to make sure that I uphold those who are credible. And so that's what Twitter especially is what I do on that one. But on Facebook, it's different because you get everything and everybody on Facebook. You get young, you get old, you get mature, you get immature, you get kids, you get teens, and everybody looks at Facebook as a means to communicate with their families. But again, very important, you can also talk to people you don't know. And Facebook makes it clearer to see those comments. And so you have to come to a realization yourself as a journalist. Is it worth getting into the mud with them? Is it worth getting into the mud with those folks? And I had to ask myself that question the last 2 years. And I realized it's not, as a journalist nor as a person. And so you have to do your job on these social media platforms while also maintaining your own integrity, because people can use you arguing with somebody else as a means to say he's not a trusted journalist. Now, I will say, I don't mind getting in arguments with people so long as they're educational, so long as they're deeply rooted in that, in what's fact and what's true. And I can do that. And I have done it. And I continue to do it sometimes. I don't mind cussing people out on social media. I do it all the time.
The old saying is never argue with a fool. Onlookers may not be able to tell the difference. So I'm glad.
My mama said you can't fix stupid. So.
Yeah. I listen, like I said, coming from a sports background in general, and a kind of a newsy backgrounds as well. Sometimes I go in, other times it's just, do I have the energy today? And I'll tell y'all, post George Floyd, I really just haven't had the energy. If I save my energy for people who I usually know, like if they're curious about something, because I know it's coming from a good place of genuine curiosity. Otherwise, use your Googles. This question comes from Victoria. Bear with me. She says she's in the conversation, so I'll pay all of you a compliment. You guys are adding a little bit of something to these people on the gloomy. Well, it's gloomy here in Chicago on Saturdays. She says her question is lengthy. She apologizes in advance. Black women in particular face the intersectionality of racism plus sexism in our everyday lives, but especially in TV. Open parentheses. Hate mail, nasty comments, objectification of our bodies. How can, close parentheses. How can new professionals that identify as Black women show up as our authentic selves without being framed as, quote, sassy, diva, end quote? I'm gonna start with the ladies on this one. Taylor, I know Polnesha gonna have a whole lot to say, so I'm gonna let you go first and say your piece.
I think how I got through it as on-air talent is understanding that you cannot control how people view you, or what they say about you. And so it's really just having, I'm trying to just figure out the right way to say it, but like the only way I got through it was just knowing that I'm the ish and just operating from that space and not letting outside voices get to my self-esteem, get to how I show up on air, get to how I show up in the newsroom. And so it's no easy way to, it's not a Band-Aid you can put on that. It's not a Band-Aid you can put on cancer. Like people have these stereotypes and how they view Black women, how they view women in general. And so you really just have to learn to see past that and kind of believe in yourself. You have to have a certain amount of confidence to do this. That doesn't sound like the best answer, but I don't know how else to answer that.
No, if you don't have thick skin, you're just not going to make it anyway. In a lot of things, not just this business in particular. Polnesha, the floor is yours.
Okay, so ask the question one more time so I can make sure that I'm zoning in my head with here.
How can new professionals that identify as Black women show up as our authentic selves without being framed as, quote unquote, sassy or a diva or worse?
Okay. I have been called a B. I have been called demanding. I have been called angry. All of the adjectives have been used to describe me. So I can only speak from my personal experience when I say this. I do not acquiesce. Somebody is going to say something. Somebody is going to feel something. And when you have your ground, you stand on it. End of story. I am not on air, so I don't know what, you know, a lot of on air people have to do. And I've never been on air, nor do I want to be for some of these reasons. Y'all have to go through some things that I am not built for. And I know that. But what I will say is anytime that I have been challenged in the workplace, and I have been, honestly, I don't switch up. Taylor mentioned, you know, sometimes the message needs to be a little bit, you know, a little bit more massaged. I have gotten to the point where I don't massage anymore because I really frankly just don't care. Like at this point, if you touch my hair, I might curse you out. I might.
Might?
I might. I've had a male boss comment on my body shape before. He got sent to HR. He is no longer with us. I have had a plethora of run-ins with people. I would say the only thing that helped me through that was, one, believing that I belong there and these are spaces that I have earned. One, that starts with confidence from within. And two, directly telling these people, this is what you did. This is wrong, and I will not tolerate it. I will go to HR on you. No questions, no ands, and no ifs about it. And even if they don't change the way they think, they know that they can't cross that line with you. You are not going to yell at me. You are not going to call me anything other than the God-given name that my parents gave me. You're also not going to accuse me of anything based on your implicit bias or your just outright bias or the microaggressions that live within you. It is so important for Black women to realize, and Black men, we belong. We earned it. In fact, we probably earned it 10 times over anybody else. Stand your ground. And if somebody has something negative to say about it, you tell them why they're wrong. And then you tell them why you belong. And then you reiterate the fact that they're gonna go try you. End of story. And then you move on.
And you serve no one from acting small. That's a big thing. You serve no one from acting small. In the same way, even if you do act small, they're gonna treat you the same way. Like they'll have the same thing to say about you. So it's kind of like show up as yourself and be yeah, and just be yourself, because you will regret it if you don't.
You will. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I got to where I am. My first 2 jobs, I cowered. I sat and I was like, oh, I'm not gonna fight this battle. At this point, if you want it, you can come get it. And that's just how I feel about it.
Oh, that's right.
When you said he's no longer with us, I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, like, did he die? I was like, did he lose his job or did he die?
Or did he lose his life?
Right.
Sounds like he lost his mind, his job, and his life.
Let me just piggyback on these, what was well said by these 2 young ladies, and understand that the most important thing you can do when you are starting a new job, because remember, this is from the standpoint of, you know, new professionals, you know, first 2-3 years in the business, perhaps. Although I feel like even 2-3 years, you learn so much in year 1. Like you kind of figure it. You'll either figure it out or you will jump ship after a year of doing what we do. It's so important to have people in your camp that you trust, that can be your support system. And when obviously we all have family, right? But you need people, mentors, peers that have worked through the business, that are going through what you are going through, and understand the dynamics of the specifics of a newsroom in order to keep your head. You're gonna walk in with your head high, and you're not gonna want to act small, but the beat down is real, or can be real at least.
Oh God, no, it is.
So you need to have people around you that support you. And this goes back a little bit to mental health. I mean, if you can find a therapist also, but like you just need people who understand what you're going through. And if you had that, I was fortunate enough when I was in my second job, I was leaning on people like Stuart Scott, Kevin Frazier, Laura Oakman, who like people who are at the height of the industry, but have been through the mud to get there. And once you do that, and you have somebody that you can go to weekly or, whenever something big happens, you'll find that the journey is going to be a lot easier than you sitting there trying to be tough and saying, I can do this all by myself. Nobody ever did anything all by themselves. Somebody either gave you an opportunity, helped you along, unless you literally work for yourself. And even then you're working for your audience. So this notion that you have to do it alone, that's some bull. I'm just here to tell you that.
I think, no, you can go.
No, you go ahead. You got the floor, Taylor.
No, I was just gonna say finding community is so important. I remember after my first year, I don't want to put her on the spot, but I called Afia and was like, girl, I don't know if I can do it. Like, and she told me, she was like, no, you're gonna stay there and this is how you're gonna do it. And that helped me so much with how I finished out my contract. And you need that. So I definitely would advise newcomers to find mentors. Because sometimes you can just be aimlessly going in a newsroom and not really know. And so you need somebody to kind of help you through that. So find a mentor and don't let your job be your identity. Because I think that helped me a lot too. Being like, okay, this is work, but like, I am someone out of this. I am loved, you know what I mean? Like I'm cherished. And that also helped me balance like what people will say to me from my on-air appearance versus like who I am. Like that person isn't my whole makeup. Like I am way more than this.
Josh, you were gonna say something?
You know what? You stole the words out of my mouth, so I'm not even gonna comment. That was exactly, just build that system around you. And when you get those who are inspiring to you more than deflating, it will bode well for you in this business and outside of it too.
Yeah.
And
I'll
I
say
think-
even.
Go ahead, Tori.
No, I was just gonna say, I think for folks who are in their first markets or in smaller markets who don't have the privilege or opportunity to surround themselves with people like that and to be inspired by people in proximity wise, I think like someone mentioned, having other people to look to that may not be as attainable, but as like a pathway to say, if this person did it, then I could do it. I was just thinking about, like, I had a conversation with Brandon a long time ago about this. New York Fox affiliate reporter in New York with locks. And then I think his name was Zach Keish, and he went to ABC News. And I was like, oh, that dude is dope. And he's like rocking natural hair. And I'm on the Hill, the only guy you'll see on the Hill on TV with, twists in his head with an undercut. And I'm like, listen, if he could do it, I could do it. And, the feedback the other day, I was doing January 6th coverage for all of our stations. And this viewer responded to my tweet saying, his job keeps our channel on the TV, and every now and then it brings him happiness to see someone who looks like him. So yeah, that just be inspired. They don't have to be there. They don't have to be tangible, but just to look out and say, somebody else did it. So I can too.
I can say this though, and I'm not just saying this because you guys are here, but B Pope and Taurean, they plucked me when I got to South Bend to make sure I was good in every single way. And they paved that way for me to be where I ended up becoming in South Bend. I like to think I became something, I don't know. But anyways, they helped me. They helped me with that.
Talk your stuff.
Yeah, okay then, all right then. But no. Taurean and B-Pope, they were supportive in that way. And when you find that support system, man, it makes monumental difference.
Yeah, we were trying to take Josh out. There can only be 2 Black people in this.
Y'all gonna get used to not being the only one in the room. That's the goal here, is to not be the only one in the room. Quick question. This one comes from Rashana. How can we make sure stories of missing Black women receive national coverage equal to their white counterparts? Polnesha, you touched on this earlier when you talked about what you had experienced in Dallas. But what is a good game plan for this, and how this problem, which is a micro when it pops up, but it's a macro problem?
Okay. The overall message is there just needs to be more of us behind the scenes. There needs to be more of us in decision-making roles. I have an immense amount of respect for on-air talent But obviously, you know, my heart lies with the producers. There were many days where we would go through rundowns and conversation be danged, I was putting the missing kid in. I was going to write that story. I made that decision for my newscast. And maybe you team up with the producer. Maybe you're a reporter. Maybe you're an on-air talent. A lot of times this happened a lot in Memphis, where like a story would get shut down in the morning meeting. I'm not, like, when I tell y'all, it happened a lot. Story shut down in the morning meeting, or quiet, or crickets like we usually get. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but it's the worst. A reporter and I would team up later off the mark, and we'd be like, okay, well, I have this person, and I would write my own package. Simply put, because if the content is there, if the trap door is there, somebody's already there prepared to voice it or to help provide content, it got on air. And I think that's maybe the strength in relationship in the newsroom, because when you team up with somebody that's like-minded, and you know, you got somebody who's 100% over a newscast, like a producer is, your stories get on air. I can't even tell you how many times I put stories together and people the next day will be like, oh my gosh, this child was kidnapped. This is why we don't ignore stories.
My bad. I'm not trying to bring up old stuff.
You're like, I'm just so stressed about it. So I would say, you know, go about it individually if you have to. Sometimes you got to fight the good fight by yourself, and it is unfortunate. And you know, you may get some perfunctory attitude from somebody in higher up, but at the end of the day, it's news, and they can't fight that.
Okay, we're running short on time here. There's a couple of quick questions I want to get through. One question was for you specifically, Josh. When the young Black man was killed in Aurora, Colorado, it didn't make national news until after the George Floyd murder. Can you describe the time between the two incidents insofar as the news coverage was concerned?
I can't, because I wasn't here. No, but I can't. I can honestly say this though. Elijah McClain obviously is who you're talking about, and that's a great question. I can tell you that I'm learning how certain incendiary events propel other hidden ones. And that's what took place in this case. A lot of our journalists at my station actually is why we've won several Murrows for it and Emmys for it, based on continuing to dig and not saying no. There was I believe a Black journalist who was here before I got here. She was also a part of the conversations a little bit about what should be done and the questions to ask, and interviewing the McClain family and what have you. But there were so many things that were hidden and pushed back in the dark. And it took George Floyd for that to happen. And it happens in so many situations where until you see something like the Gabby Petito thing, someone mentioned that earlier. Now we're paying attention more to people of color that are missing, because now we had to bring it up. I can tell you that's what thrust Elijah into the fore, because of what took place with George Floyd. Although there were things in the works way before it came out, it just took about a year or so for things to come out, because George Floyd helped propel and accelerate those things. I know I didn't answer the question completely because I wasn't here, but that's some of the
okay. No, it was a quick question. Just want to get your personal, because that question was addressed to Josh. I was like, let me get it to Josh. This other question comes from Kevin, who wants to know, what do you do when upper management and HR are the same person in small markets? And first thing I do is I contact an attorney. But we usually, even in a small market, there's usually an ownership group, and there's HR from a corporate standpoint with most stations. But yeah, for me personally, my sister's an attorney, so I just call her. But everybody doesn't have that resource. But talk to your mentors / your community and just kind of go through what are your options. Got to have some type of a game plan, is what I would say to that. What do you guys think about that?
I think you still tailor is real work. Finish that contract out and get out.
Yeah. Sue the hell out of them. Go ahead, Tori.
Yeah, make a note of every interaction that is questionable that you want to take to HR, but you can't get everything in writing. So save those emails, save those documents. Even if you don't have the money for an attorney down the road, that's good leverage when you're trying to exit, and maybe exit earlier than your contract. Like, listen, this is all the not so great things you've said or done to me. One thing unrelated, but it was about the conversation about the disparity in coverage of missing Black women. I'll just encourage everyone to check out the podcast Through the Cracks by Jonquilyn Hill, one of my good friends out here in DC. She works for an affiliate NPR station, and it's about Relisha Rudd, a little girl in DC, went through the homeless care system and went missing. It was a huge story in DC that fizzled out because it happened a long time ago, and her reporting on it was both intimate, nuanced, and I think the most elegant way to tell this story. I foresee her winning all the awards at the end of the season, but it's just a story that deserves to be told. And as she said, as growing up as a Black girl, she wanted to tell the story about protecting Black girls, and what an eloquent way to do it. So Through the Cracks is the name of the podcast.
Through the Cracks podcast. I'm gonna check that out for my next run when it gets warm enough out here to, get back to running. I wanted to, what I said and what you guys said about writing things down as far as dealing with the HR and management being the same person. Listen, documentation in everything. I'll tell you that right now. Anytime you have a bad experience at work, you immediately don't wait till you get home. We all got phones. Go in your little notes and just start writing down what was said, how it was said, time of day, situation, as many details as you can document at the time something happens. I'm big on documenting, and I'm also big on, if something was said to me and I didn't like it, I will email that person like, this is what you said. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. That way now it's not only documented, but once they respond to it, they're acknowledging it happened and it exists. Like, document everything.
Yeah.
Documentation.
And see if there's an NABJ or NAACP chapter out near you, because they love those press releases.
Yes. That's absolutely factual. This is going to be the last call for questions. We've got to wrap things up in the next 5 minutes or so. As we wait for that, I just want to go around the room, virtually speaking, and just tell me what you guys think of how this went and what's your takeaway from it all. We'll start with the ladies. Taylor, I'll let you go first.
This was really helpful. Like I said, I'm still in my first, couple of years in the industry as a journalist. So to even hear what other panelists had to say, what you had to say, Marshall, I learned a lot. So I'm really happy to be in good company and share some of my experience. And I really hope that it helps somebody.
It has been a pleasure having you, Taylor. I really appreciate it. Polnesha, not gonna let you have the last word because then we just be here forever. So I'm gonna give it to you.
Okay,
now.
first of all, I resent that statement.
You said you resemble that statement?
Resent. You jerk. I would just echo Taylor. I'm really happy to be here. I think we had some really amazing dialogue, and I too learned from our panelists, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. Yes, Marshall, expect a call from HR. And I want to finish off by saying that you belong. If this conversation didn't show you anything else, like, you are in the space that you're supposed to be in, and you're supposed to be fighting for the stories that are important to you. You wouldn't be hired in the position that you are if that was not the case. And to take that by the horns and, keep going with it and believe in yourself. And when you need support, find that tribe. They can help you through it. And I'm really, really excited about what happens next for everybody that's involved in the panel and those who are listening.
I echo those sentiments, Polnesha. You're the only person I knew before we got in here in this virtual chat room. So I'm glad to have added some people to the proverbial ledger. Speaking of, Josh, what's your takeaway from all of this?
So Taylor, Polnesha, Taurean, and Marshall, and everybody else, thank you for doing this. I think so many people I learned a lot. I've been in the business 5 years, 4.5, 5 years, and I'm learning so much from you guys. have to credit so many people in this chat for where I am today. Even Rebecca Cowling, she may be here, she may not be here, but we go way back. So, it's just a full circle moment for me. But to be a part of this and to help bring up some journalists too, we need to do more. This is amazing. So I'm just glad to be a part of it.
And Taurean, I'll let you have the last word from the panelists.
Save the best for last. No, I'm grateful for this conversation. I thought we discussed quite a bit. And again, I'm always about promoting other people because, like Josh said, they were instrumental, even if they don't know, in my development, just in terms of great storytelling of Black representation or the Black community. Julian Gracie was a reporter at a station in Indianapolis. He is now in Baltimore, but man, was that guy on top of it, and the presence that he had too. He had so much conviction behind his reporting, but also his presentation. And that was something that was inspiring. I met him a couple of times, but Brandon and I know we would talk several times about some of he did this one piece on, it was a rash of shootings in this one neighborhood in Indianapolis. And he went to this restaurant because he had frequented there, but they always play gospel music. So one day he decided to talk to the owner about why. And she was like, because I hear the sounds of gunshots every day. I want to blur out that sound with this uplifting music. And that little detail and the culture behind it too. Again, one of the pillars of the Black community is the church. So to tell that story, to introduce other people to our experience through this storytelling is great. Again, Eva McKinn, she's now at CNN, so you can catch her doing her CNN stuff. But she's great. I can't speak enough to Jonquilyn Hill. She's incredible. And Through the Cracks pod, it's like I work for her because I'm promoting her so much. But it's such a great podcast. Again, she talks about protecting Black women, Black girls with such grace. And it was eye-opening for me as a Black man to hear it. So many great reporters, many great journalists. Josh, obviously. He killed it with his Emmy win for his great storytelling. I remember Josh would do some on that desk would do some stories about, Black round tables or conversations with police. So yeah, great examples to learn from and to watch and to follow as we continue the conversation about Black storytelling.
Y'all can also follow me on Twitter too if y'all want.
Yeah,
don't do it. Don't do it.
This panel itself is about to end in less than a minute. So I just wanted to say thank you guys for having me as your moderator. Afia, I'll turn it back over to you for any final comments.
Wait.
Thank
Josh,
you so
get your
much.
shirt?
Sorry, we have to wrap, Nisha. I'm so sorry because we're literally about to get kicked out of this. But we have recorded this and it will be up on the Emmy Online website later this coming week, so that you can replay it or you can pass it to friends and family. I will also blast everyone's emails out, not emails, I'm sorry, but their social media accounts so that you're able to get in touch with them. Please follow NABJ online, please follow Shy Natus online. And thank you guys for spending your Saturday morning with us. Thank you all
thanks,
for watching.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry to cut you off, Polnesha.
No, I just wanted to know where he got his shirt from. That's all.
Oh, that's not, is that one of
that
those,
News Life. That News
That
Life.
News
Yes.
Life, yeah.
Yeah, not the pink shirt, Josh.
I think Josh left.
I think he's gone. He out.
Oh, Josh got offended by that statement?
I think that's the one that got him. Thank you guys so much. Taylor, I'm so incredibly proud of you. Those that don't know, Taylor was my intern, and to see her now, a couple of years out of school, standing on her own, I'm incredibly proud of you. So keep up the good work. And you have these people's emails now as well. And obviously you work with Polnesha, so please make sure that you cultivate relationships with them so that you can continue to grow. All right, thank you. I'll let y'all go to your Saturday. So thank you so much again for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thanks for having
everybody.
us, Afia.
Great panel.
Good night.
Nice to meet you,
appreciate
John.
it. Nice
See
meeting
y'all.
you, Marshall.
Great stuff.
Here.